Morning. And I think, right at the beginning, let's go a little out of order. Welcome to the Urban Renewal Advisory Council, but I know you introduced yourself and I kind of did as well, but maybe we'll just go down and have formal introductions so you know who we are and what our involvement is, what we do in the community in addition to the advisory council. And for the attendee or attendees on Zoom, they'll know who we are as well.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Abigail Elder. I'm your city manager. I started November 1st. And previously our finance director, Will Norris, was the rep to this committee. So when he left us this summer, then I got to join you. So I'm happy to be here. Yeah, I think that's probably it for right now. Super excited to be working with you.
I'm Abby Capabilla, a long time and happy to be serving on the Urban Renewal Advisory Board. I have a business in the Heights and lived in Hood River my whole life. And
I'm Pat McAllister. I'm a retired business operator on the Heights. I've been retired for about 2.5 years and been on one of the original advisory committee members along with Jack. So.
Thank you, Pat. And I think, Pat, I'm Jack Trumbull. I have a business in the Heights as well within the geographical location of our Heights urban plan. However, Pat and I have been on the Urban Renewal Advisory Council since its inception, helping with the State Street project as well as the waterfront project. I think we sunsetted the Cascade. We didn't have any involvement in that. That one pre-existed our involvement. I want to say 13 years now, or
Since 11.
Since 11?
So, yeah.
Okay. 11 years. See how quick I grew up in Idaho. I can do quick math. Okay.
I'm Josh Chandler. I've been with the advisory committee for coming up on 4 years. I've been in Hood River just about as long. I am currently the interim community development director, City of the Dalles.
Well, thank you. I expect to learn a lot from all of you who've been doing this for a lot longer than I have. My name is Kate Hoffman. I'm the Planning Commission representative for the commission. I've lived in the Gorge for about 9 years now. I work as a paralegal for a private law firm that does like civil rights sort of law and public defense. So this is all super interesting to me, and thank you for having me.
And Kate, is this your first meeting or were you?
Yes, no, I was not at the last meeting.
Well, wonderful. Welcome. So I would, our next line item is business from the audience, and those of us that are here can see that we have no audience tonight. Those of you that are on Zoom will just have to take our word for it. And if there was any business from the audience, like is listed in our agenda, you'll have to sign up in advance to share. So we will move on to line item 3, agenda additions and corrections. Before we, I don't want to take away from what you want to discuss, but agenda additions or corrections, I missed the last meeting, which I know we kind of audibled and changed the date. I could have made our scheduled date, and I think I replied all. And I got my hand slapped a couple times because I replied all, and that's not the appropriate thing to do. So as far as before we go on to approve the minutes from last meeting that I wasn't a part of, I'd like to maybe talk a little bit about the Heights project, that was, and I'd like to have it on record, just a little bit of what was pushed forward to the agency and to the city council, because I did express some concerns again by replying all via email. And I'll go ahead and start with voicing my concerns. I was a part of both days at the Armory and listening to a lot of businesses, kind of walking up and down the street. And I feel out of the designs that we had, I think the design that was presented to the agency and the city council with is the best of the three designs. However, the one thing that I've been championing and suggesting is that we need to look at the side streets as part of this, because as I've talked to businesses, they're concerned about parking. And not that we would ever be a net zero with the loss of parking with implementing safe corridors for pedestrians and bicyclists. But the one thing I've mentioned repeatedly was turning the side streets between 12th and 13th into one ways. I'm a big proponent of the back end parking spaces. I like that on potentially 12th Street as well. I know it's designed and shown for pull-in forward spaces, but that's going to be a single lane. I know we're talking about cutting the traffic down to a third of what its current traffic pattern is, and most of the traffic will move over to 13th. The one thing that I would be frustrated and remiss if I don't address it now is as we move forward, looking at design option 3, to have anybody tell me that's not within the scope of the project. Because we never, unless it was at the meeting I missed, but I don't feel the advisory council ever voted on that, making that motion to the agency for them to proceed with that option. That's me just putting stuff out on the record. And we have kind of a small meeting tonight. And I know you and I talked, and I think I don't want to talk for you, but I think you and I talked about like option 3 kind of being the best of the options, but needing a little tweaking. But I think I'll let Pat, I know you wanted to address a couple things, and then is it okay if we just kind of, this is kind of additions, because I don't feel comfortable. Well, you guys can make a motion and pass. I wasn't a part of the last meeting, so I wasn't privy to the minutes as they're stated here. So I'll abstain from this, but
I would, because this was not a topic on the agenda, and I certainly appreciate wanting to debrief this, I would say it's a good discussion item. I don't know that you would want to have a motion just because it wasn't noticed as something that you were going to act on tonight, but absolutely a conversation. And I think, well, I definitely want to hear from everybody, but Jack, just to Mr. Trumbull, Mr. Chair, as you were talking, I just want to assure you that I believe the side streets are going to be part of the scope of the, so Dustin is planning to come to your October meeting with a proposed scope of work for MIG. This would be phase 3. Looking to have you look at that in October, and then moving the Urban Renewal Agency Board meeting to the end of October, so that you have a chance to review it first and can give a formal recommendation to the board before they meet. I think that'll be October 24th. So we can definitely discuss it tonight, but know that it'll be the main topic for your October meeting as well.
so this, we're not going to make any motions. We're not going to.
Perfect.
But I missed the last meeting. And the other thing before, I'm going to skip ahead, but before we approve the minutes, I would like to suggest that we just table that motion for approval of the minutes until we have the rest of our advisory council at the next meeting. And maybe just have a little bit of conversation out loud here, because that's kind of, I've always kind of looked at our group as the mouthpiece of the community, and we gather information and we try to regurgitate what we hear from the community and share that with the agency. And then it felt like it kind of circumvented us a little bit. That's my feeling. Abby, I'll let you shut up.
No, I will say that we have had to, reschedule a number of meetings, and I know that there was an Urban Renewal Agency meeting that recently took place that I know I meant to attend but wasn't able to. So it'd just be good to have sort of a recap of, the minutes from that meeting as well, and then we can sort of further discuss amongst our group, continuing that feedback.
Sure, I guess I'd just like to have an idea of what transpired with because I feel like we got passed over and the Urban Renewal Board was given by the city or Dustin or whoever, and was put on an agenda and they took action. I'd just like to know what action they took place and so forth, and what's leading to phase 3 or whatever. But they're looking at, because the last I knew, we were looking at a hybrid of taking option 2 and 3 and doing some takeaways of, taking the good things from 2 and good things from 3 and having a combined, and we were supposed to be getting some information back on that. And the next thing I know, the city council's voting to approve the scope of work. So I was wondering why we were kind of taken out of the loop.
Does that make sense?
Or even with we talked also about the existing transportation plan
Mhm.
and, and basically the cost analysis, the feasibility of each of those design schemes and, that sort of being brought to the agency's attention first. Because, there's obviously an amount of resources available and our goal is to make the most of this funding mechanism within urban renewal to achieve, functional and pleasing design changes in the Heights District. So that was kind of my takeaway from our previous meeting. And then, a lot of time has elapsed since then. So just hoping we can all get on the same page again.
And I think this is good for you to be a part of this, to kind of maybe learn a little bit of what my understanding is of our role, so you can better understand the role you're stepping into. But and I don't, maybe you understand this, maybe there's been a little bit of an onboarding as you submitted the application to be on here, but there's with urban, and I miss Will already, because Will would do such a great job explaining what urban renewal is and the bucket of money and the funds. Do you have an understanding?
And I do have like a pretty base level understanding. I was on the affordable housing task force as well with the city, and we discussed a lot of what the urban renewal districts do and where their funding comes from and where it goes and things like that. So
I'm not going to explain that ad nausea, but our role as the advisory council, like I had said, my understanding is that we're kind of the conduit from the public to the agency, and the agency is part of the city council as well as members of the court and another at-large, I believe. Two court
members in the city council.
Okay. So my understanding is the advisory council shares the conduit of information from the community, the agency being part of the city council. And then so we make suggestions that are fed to us that go through the agency. And that's kind of the process. And what you're hearing from me, I don't want to talk from anyone else, is that I felt like we kind of got to that next step before I was happy with the design and project. And I think Pat was too, and Abby a little bit, because I missed the meeting. You guys were at that meeting, but I think I was under the understanding we were still kind of in the design process. So I was kind of a little taken back when I had city council calling me, asking me my thoughts and feelings on what was on their agenda. And that was, okay, I'm not talking out of turn. Eric Haney and I talked about this prior to the city council meeting, and I'm aware that Eric shared some of my concerns at the city council meeting, which I appreciated, because if I do have concerns, I need to voice them. I'm not going to. Sorry, shut up. Do you have any takeaways or anything that you wanted to talk about before we move on?
The only thing is just it has been a while for me. So I missed this last meeting as well. So I wasn't entirely sure where the direction was.
So I think as long as we've kind of expressed our concerns here, when we get back into October and we look at the scope of the project and we modify and we talk about the hybrid between 2 and 3, and we look at the side streets, have it out there now in our minutes, not in an informal email back to the agency and city council saying, pump the brakes, what's going on. But I think let's table the approval of the June 23rd minutes until we have our full board at the next meeting.
I just want to say one more thing about, the last meeting. There were a lot of things discussed before the meeting. With the previous agenda, we had got 375 pages of information that was a summary of the open house and all the work from Mig and the people involved in the phase 2 side of it. And we had a week to get through that. I got through a good portion of it, but since then I've been able to get through about 90%. And there's a lot of good information in there. And with what I've been able to take back, from what I've heard with city council, I also talked with Eric. And it's one of those things that from the information we were given, seems like different information was given to city council. And that's a concern that I have, because there's some of us on this committee that have put several years into trying to do what's right for the Heights. And we've turned around and put a lot of time, a lot of reviewing, a lot of talking to our neighbors, our fellow businessmen on the Heights, women, I should say, persons. And now we're out of the loop, and that really concerns me. And I know the city's had a transition with, like, I'll second what Jack had to say about Will. Will was on top of it. He kept us all in line and kept us informed, and that's gotten missed or something. Okay, but I'd really like to know what truly transpired at the city council and how that affects the Heights. So.
Great.
Paul, do you want to share?
Sure, I would just, I would like to say thank you for your comments, and I appreciate hearing all of that. Like I said, I watched your junior act meeting, but I wasn't actively attending here. At the agency board meeting, I think Dustin tried to convey comments he had heard from all of you, but I don't know that he had a specific recommendation from your act, or if you were asked or to provide a recommendation. If I remember correctly, the format of that meeting was questions that had come up, I think mostly from the agency members, and then it was the consultant answering a lot of those, like, questions about, like, what's ODOT's role and has ODOT been included? You know, what do roundabouts look like? What are the actual traffic counts? So Jen or I could send you the link to that meeting if you'd like to watch it. It'd be super valuable. It's online. You might find that really helpful to watch before this next meeting. They did take an action to recommend option 3 as the place to direct staff to move forward on that. Now, within that, there's so many more decisions, right? Saying option 3 does not mean we're saying roundabouts versus lights, or, you know, exactly, what parking looks like or what side streets look like. All of those are questions that would need to be in whatever the next phase is. So the direction really was, in the whole universe of possibilities, let's limit it a bit and say, let's be looking at option number 3. But I heard you say, Mr. McAllister, that you were looking for a hybrid, and I think some of those elements are still in play. So the agency board will not be taking any action until you have had your meeting and are able to give a scope or review of that scope of work, assuming that you meet in October. So, we did not get to meet in August. I was really sad about that, just because I just presented to council on Monday what I'm going to present to you tonight. And that's flipped. Really want to bring things to you first, but trying to move this along quickly and not being able to have a meeting in August due to lack of a quorum was really hard. So we're really committed to trying to get things in the right order, and really ask you to commit to the meetings as well. So now that school's back in session, we'll all get things back on track. So I appreciate your patience with us.
One of the things that concerns me, and being at the last meeting, what we're looking at with the Herban, no matter which option we select up there, and if it's option 3, is the overall cost of option 3. We've got the urban renewal district is set up with $8.3 million of indebtedness that we can incur. This project, and sitting there, we're looking at 30 to 40 million for this project. And before we can select an option, how are we going to fund that? Because that's where it's going to come with the high inflation, high petroleum prices, everything like that. It's going to be, this concern is how we're going to fund it. What is there grants, is there other loans, whatever the case may be. How are we going to fund this? Because sure, it's going to cost a lot more than 8.3.
For sure.
Okay.
Yeah. And I believe the scope of work, because I've not seen the draft yet, but my understanding that scope will include identifying funding sources and the implementation and sequencing of projects with that in mind. The other pieces, when I think about funding, not just the construction, but will the agency need to acquire property to do any of this? That would be another significant cost that will need to be studied.
And then the other issue that is thing that I read in the paper and different things is the role of ODOT. And the role of ODOT has a lot to say in this. However, there's been conversation of circumventing ODOT and the city of Hood River taking over 12th and 13th Street. And I have a big concern about that because it's going to be a very large budget line item for the city to maintain 13th Street, especially in the wintertime. And that's one of the things that I would like to hear solutions or proposed solutions that the city may have, how they're going to handle it if they decide to take that route. Because I'm looking at public safety from the standpoint, we're looking at doing this on the heights to improve pedestrian safety and public safety, and that does concern me, and I think that should concern you as city manager on a budget item.
For sure. I think ODOT is probably question number one on this, and they have been consulted and informed of this process. I think they are amenable to an interjurisdictional transfer. However, I think that the questions of not only the ongoing maintenance and safety of 13th, but what it costs to bring it up to what the city considers a good standard for a road. I think when the city, predates me, but the city was able to take over Oak Street fairly easily and quickly during the pandemic, right, to allow for the parklets. But Oak Street was in excellent condition, right? That was the easy transfer. 12th and 13th, that's a different situation where that'd be a much more complicated transfer. And Dustin is definitely aware of that. ODOT's definitely aware of that, and the consultants know that as well. So I expect conversations with ODOT to be part of their scope of work.
Yeah, my concern, it's not necessarily bringing it up to a standard. It's the ongoing day-to-day maintenance, especially in the wintertime.
Yeah.
So.
True, although I think we do a lot of that day-to-day maintenance. I think we have agreements with ODOT that we tend to do a lot of the plowing and grading and, kind of work hand in hand with them on those things. So, because sometimes we're just impatient. We're just going to take care of it before ODOT can get to it. Agreed.
The other very important thing to be mindful of is that our urban renewal district goes from Cascade to Brookside, not just Mace Street, Belmont. So we, with our prior design team, we had a defined 3-stage process to this, whereas with MIG we kind of changed to just we even changed the name to the Heights something streetscape project. But with our prior design team, we had 3 tiers that we were going to focus on. The Heights was where we were going to go first because that's the the girth of the project. But we also need to look at the other properties that are part of this district that are deferring tax increment for us to better sidewalks, better crossings, et cetera, all the way past Rosars to Brookside. Okay, let's table the approval of minutes, and I'll turn it over to you once again, and you can give us an update on the additional urban renewal project.
Excellent. Again, Abigail Elder, your city manager. And I heard you say today, which I didn't know, that this committee started as specifically on the Heights, and then you have absorbed all of the other urban renewal districts. And I am here to make your life even more complicated. So I'm excited about that. Give me just a second to share my screen here. All right, did that show up? Perfect. So City Council and the Urban Renewal Advisory Board have been talking about a West Side Urban Renewal District. I think you all participated, those of you who are on the committee. Last November, it was actually my first Urban Renewal Agency Board meeting. It was both the board and the committee had a joint meeting where Will Norris and consultants Eileen Howard and her associates did a short possible scope of work. Really got kind of that blessing of like, yes, let's think about this some more. Then City Council actually identified this as one of their top most critical projects for the year. So hoping to move on this. So our first stage is to really have a feasibility study, and assuming that goes well, kind of have a pause, and then we would do a full TIF, tax increment funding, or a urban renewal plan. So I want to just work through today kind of what that scope of work would include, and you have a draft scope of work. Definitely would love to hear your comments and thoughts on that, but just kind of walk through what I think those pieces include. So I'll just see if I can get this to work. Ta-da! So as I said, the scope would include 2 phases, right? A feasibility piece, and then a pause to say, yes, this is something we actually want to do and move forward. And then the full urban renewal and TIF plan. They have a lot of overlap. And so I'm going to actually talk about both phases in kind of each category here. So the first category is public involvement. I think this is the piece where I think we're really looking to you to be the voice of the community and advise the committee, advise both the Urban Renewal Board and staff and the agents, the consultant, on what public involvement should look like, who should be consulted, what is the best way to reach people in our community. Need help with monitors?
Yeah.
Jen, can you take a quick look at monitors?
I got it.
Oh, fantastic. Say, I don't know how they work either, so. So one thing that I think makes this project particularly interesting is the direction we've received so far is, rather than like start with a blank piece of paper and say, where do we want to go on a West Side Urban Renewal District? We've said, we already have 3 plans that we think we should try to implement. And that's the transportation system plan, the multi-jurisdictional parks and recreation plan, and the affordable housing strategy that the council just adopted. All 3 of those plans had their own public involvement component. Some of them are a little bit old, right? TSP is more than 10 years old, although it had an amendment. Some of them are really new. The housing, I heard Commissioner Hoffman that you were, or Member Hoffman, that you were part of that committee, and that just wrapped up in May. So I think this is going to be a really nuanced question around public involvement. So I'll really be looking for your advice when we get to that. I want to talk specifically about the taxing districts because they are a specific and really important type of outreach. In the feasibility study, really be educating the districts about what the potential impact could be for them, what it looks like to freeze their increment, and then what it would look like when it came back on the rolls. However, the taxing districts do not have a vote in this. They don't have veto power. We don't need to get like half of them to approve an urban renewal district. The one exception is the county. And that is because we assume, or I assume at this point, that a future West Side Urban Renewal District will probably incorporate some unincorporated areas that we expect are already in the UGD. They would be coming into the city at some point. We might accelerate that. So the county would need to approve any project. Back in April, Will Norris gave a presentation to the council. It was to the county. It was the exact same one that you had seen in, or very similar to that you had seen in November. And so the county was generally nodding their heads, didn't have a lot of questions, but it'll be critical to keep the county especially informed. In my italics there, you notice say more approvals are needed if the plan included a public building. So for example, if we decided to include a police station, or if we wanted to provide funding for a new school in the urban renewal district, that would require a vote of the 4 most impacted districts would get to vote on that, and at least 3 of them would have to approve it. As I believe I've heard for this plan so far at this very conceptual stage, I don't think there are any plans for a public building. And specifically parks, buildings like a recreation facility or a picnic shelter, whatever, are not considered public buildings for urban renewal. So that's just an odd little piece to be aware of. These are the districts that are in the area that would need to be consulted and informed. So we've got, of course, the county, the communications district, the city, the port, parks. And then the bottom three there are all educational districts. They are not impacted by urban renewal because their dollars come from the state. However, of course, we want to keep them informed. I mean, if we're going to expect a population shift and the school district needs to know if they need a school on the west side, that's important to them. But their finances are not affected by urban renewal district. The second piece of both the feasibility plan and a TIF plan are the boundaries. So we can do multiple scenarios in the feasibility study. Look what that is. As you know, the total acreage in the city has to be limited to 25%. So that has an important piece to play on when we think about what might happen with the waterfront district. So I think at your June meeting, Michael McElway, who was retired public works director, talked to you about them wanting to do a study. I'm expecting their study to be done probably in November. So probably we'll come back to you with that information about what a reduced or a smaller waterfront district would look like. So it is its own project, but it has an impact on this because any acreage provided for that cannot be used for the West Side district. As you probably know, the boundaries, like logical boundaries are best, but you can also cherry stem. Like if we want to try to get some of the north piece of north of 84, we could cherry stem that to the district. So this is a piece that Will showed you back in November. You can see this was a very drafty idea of what a boundary might look like. You can see it really focuses on Cascade because of when we think about the ODOT project to bring cyclists in. It's not a very cycle-friendly bike path right now. But that is very much just an assumption built on waterfront closing using the maximum number of acres. That's not at all where we think it's necessarily going to end up. The third criteria for the feasibility plan and for the TIF plan is blight, which is a word I hate. It makes me think of the 1970s. But blight has a lot of definitions, and I've included two of them here. Just the existence of inadequate streets and other rights of way, or just land that could be potentially useful and valuable for contributing to public health, safety, and welfare. So that would be a piece of the consultant's review, is to determine, is this area truly considered blight? Not every property in the district has to be considered blighted, just enough of it. And you can see there are some of the ways they would do that analysis. I think some of this would actually wind up coming back to the Planning Commission for a zoning analysis. And Planning Commission has a specific role in this, in that I think they also, by ORS, have to receive an update and give comment. The feasibility and TIF plan also try to identify projects. Of course, in the feasibility stage, it's pretty fuzzy as to what those projects might be. In the TIF plan, you want to have an outline of what the major projects are and whatever properties you anticipate acquiring. So you start very general, and then you get a little bit more specific when you get to the plan. As I said, we envision at this point that the plan would incorporate these three. So it's really nice we have some shortcuts here, because projects have already been identified. We're choosing from a pre-selected list, as opposed to starting from scratch and saying, what are all the things we would like to think about? So it feels nice that we're a little bit ahead of the game. Of course, anything we do needs to be in harmony with our comprehensive plan. So the review study will do that just generally, and then the TIF plan goes through each goal and objective and how it is addressed in the plan. And then the proposed district itself has to have goals and objectives. So I would really see your committee having an important role in forming those goals and objectives. And then finally, most intimidatingly to me, is that financial analysis of the district. What the projects might cost, where the resources would be available, what the trends have been, and then when we would determine the frozen base, and then all of the things that would impact the taxing districts and the city's growth. So again, here's an example of a slide that Will shared with you back in November of 2022 that had two scenarios, one 20 years, and then the other one is the 30 years. So you see in 20 years, you've got a lot of front-loaded projects, and then you pay back over a long time. The 30-year, you can see it's much more chunked out over the time period. So the very next steps are to issue a request for proposals and award a consultant contract. That's what you have in front of you today is a version of that. Then we start the feasibility process. I made the assumption that it would probably take till March. So best guesses on my part. Then assuming things went well, and then in March, February, March, you see that. The agency board sees it and you want to move forward another 6 months to review that. You can see that that means I missed my first deadline there. August is the deadline to freeze the base using the property tax values of this past January 1st. And then the end of the year would be the deadline to establish the first year of increment funding. Sorry, I missed a word there. When I talked to the agency board, give you their feedback, they were generally pretty positive about the plan and the scope as presented. However, they asked to speed up that timeline. They asked, is there anything we can do to hit that August 1st deadline? And they noted that we've done some of that feasibility work, some of the financial analysis that you saw back in November of 2021. So they were hopeful that some of that work has been done. And though some of the public involvement that had happened with the plans, could we kind of move quickly on the feasibility plan and move more rapidly to the urban renewal, the TIF plan? So that's the one piece I wanted to bring to you. That's new information for you. And I definitely want to hear your reactions as well. That's it. A very, very fast review of what needs to be included. I don't think the ORS requires us to have a feasibility plan, but in a project this big, starting from scratch, I think it's pretty smart for us to start with, to really test our assumptions about what we're doing. So now I'm looking for any reactions, specific, language corrections, or just general reactions on the scope as proposed.
This is I've talked with a few urban renewal projects now.
Oh, great.
Been in business, so this is kind of a new.
This is different.
And
Or a mix.
Are there other permitted, I assume, in other parts of Oregon that you can show us, and where other residential that's geographical regions have benefited from urban renewal and what they did?
Yeah.
And I suspect, and this is kind of there's not a specific question here, I'll let you take over in a second. And then I guess what is the city's plan with the urban renewal funds? Is it specific? I mean, do they have some rough broad strokes? I know we haven't had any community involvement yet, but is it transportation? Is it connected streets? Because I know that map area, there's a couple disconnected connectors, if you will.
Yep.
So I'll let you kind of explain a little bit more about the residential aspect of urban renewal, because I'm new.
Sure. Thank you for the question. I know that there are several communities that have been incorporating housing, and an urban renewal handbook that really recommends that you include housing, because of course, as an area gentrifies, it becomes difficult for people maybe who have lived there to stay there, and really want to be sensitive to that. I don't know any examples off the top of my head. I can think of the Cully neighborhood in Portland, but that's really urban place. I know, let me look back for some smaller cities and bring back some cases for you, case studies. That would be great. And then the city's plan for the urban renewal funds, I will say just very generally, would be to front load transportation projects, right? Those are the ones that are going to unlock development, and then add in affordable housing, probably from a land banking point of view, right? The city wants to be able to buy land when it's still affordable. Once the development occurs, that's going to go up really quickly. So think about phasing transportation first, affordable housing, and then the parks district being, or the parks and other recreational facilities like trails coming on the tail end of that. Once development has been unlocked and funding starts to become available and being generated in the district itself, then to pay for those things, as opposed to loading those on the front, because they don't bring a return on those.
Question that total indebtedness, I see you said approximately 100 million. Is that the maximum you can do on urban renewal, or is that where you've set the maximum based on the map that you have established?
It's not the maximum, and I need to refer back to your November meeting to see what the maximum was. It was what Elaine Howard and her consultants had recommended, was about 100 million. I think it could have gone up to I think 144 million, but they weren't recommending it go that high.
In November, I think they presented 2 or 3 different paths.
Mhm.
They decided on the one that you showed tonight.
Mhm.
It's still in-
Still very much to be studied. Right. Absolutely. In fact, I feel, hesitant to give you any specifics, just to say they're all still on the table. Really just pulling that from that November meeting.
Yeah, you gotta watch Pacific. Jack's kind of like.
It's gonna quote back in, several years ago, this is what was said. Yeah, and it's of course at this point, that chicken and egg, right? You need specifics in order to have something to react to. But you don't want to get too specific because we don't want to say those things are locked in.
The 25% of acreage,
Mhm.
you mentioned, so keeping the waterfront district, but shrinking it? Or how close, I mean, what does that look like to get us to this, the 25%?
I think the waterfront, and I'm not sure exactly how big the waterfront is now, 100 acres, and they're looking, Elaine Howard is the consultant that the port has hired to study this. And I think if you remember in your June meeting, I think Michael offered you a couple different options. And I think they were like, basically one option was just lot 1. That's the area they're looking to develop. Another was, I think, 10 acres and 20 acres. So that releases, if it's 100 acres, that releases, 80 acres or whatever. So
So the shrinkage of that would
Yep.
take away
well,
the deferred tax for lot 6, for example, still
mhm.
developed. What benefit would shrinking the waterfront district, other than opening the opportunity for the west side district? I mean, it would take away the funds.
It would, so as I understand it, not an urban renewal expert at all, I too miss Will Norris a lot, is that they're looking, so maximum indebtedness has been reached in the waterfront district, right? Is all going into the pipe that has to be replaced for stormwater. But kind of reconfiguring it with a smaller footprint, and that would allow all the dollars to be focused on the infrastructure needed for lot 1, I think is the port's intent. And I'm not sure I know what lot 6 is.
I'm just getting my lots mixed up.
Oh, okay.
I'm finding this whole concept of shifting boundaries in different districts
Mhm.
kind of interesting, because I feel like, in a way, we're needing to prioritize different areas in different districts based on the timeline of wanting to move forward on actual on the ground projects. So, I would be curious to see some of the different possibilities from the feasibility study on the boundaries and what the specific urban renewal funds would be utilized for a west side area district, if that so comes to be. But also, considering where potentially parts of Cascade would intersect with the Heights district. And if part of that corridor became like a earlier phase, of sort of like branching off into the west and that commercial corridor initially, or, just sort of seeing what could evolve and how much, if that also became a way to increase the funding for achieving the Heights project that's already in existence.
That's a great question. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure how the 25% exactly
Mhm.
is determined, as far as land area or tax lot value, or so that would be
Right.
something I need to.
How's that calculated? I know it's a fascinating piece to me is the city of Hood River's boundaries include a fair amount of the river. And so
Yeah.
we get to include that in our math when we think about the 25%. So most cities don't have that that
Yeah.
extra piece of cushion.
It would be kind of nice to be able to, have these focal points of energy towards, accomplishing development when it is a, appropriate time or where you can, have the resources available and not have this inflation and,
Yeah.
and then still sort of build on that throughout other areas in the city.
Thank you.
You had mentioned the front end for infrastructure and transportation. There
Mhm.
still has to be some appropriate collection for tax increment before you can bond or finance any of that.
Mhm.
You've kind of witnessed firsthand how slow the Heights project is done. And that's not because the city or anybody wants to move slow. It's just kind of the collection of that for tax before we can get it.
Yeah, because it was the Heights, unlike the waterfront or even the west side, was highly developed. And the only way that you
Right.
increase additional improvements on the Heights and Heights district is where you get growth and able to do things. That's like the waterfront. Undeveloped, all the development just increased and increased. And that's why it's such a same thing should happen on the west side too, because you got within that boundaries, you've got a lot of undeveloped property.
Right. I think there's a lot to unlock there.
Yeah.
And I think in conversations with at least some of the property owners, I think they're very much aware that this project is being proposed, and I think also looking for that unlocking. They recognize just how high the costs are for the infrastructure and can really unlock things. Yeah, that's a really good point, Mr. McAllister, about the difference between the situation when the Heights started versus when the waterfront started.
Well, the biggest thing with the like on the Heights, that is the property owners need to understand their taxes aren't going to go up. It's what
Correct.
Taxes are going to be spent.
Yes,
You know, so
Yeah,
you gotta
things
be
are-
more concerned with tax districts than property.
yeah. And thank you for saying that. When I presented to council on Monday, someone told me the next day they heard on the radio that like the city wants to start taxing you. This is not a tax increase. This is a change in how taxes are spent, to invest in this area, but it is not an increase to property owners.
That's usually the conversation I have with property owners in the district, and that's the first thing you got to clarify,
Yeah,
because otherwise they're against it. Until they find out. what
Sure.
tax 2-3%. Well, that's for everybody. It's just more than dollars.
that's right. Yeah, and that's a really good point. When I think about public involvement, just educating folks on what it means to have an urban renewal district is the very first part of that, of any kind of involvement. Thank you.
I'll also add that a lot of the feedback that we've gotten is that the tax lot owners themselves feel left out of this process. And that as much public engagement as we can, gather is, of course, essential to the project, but also, we also really want to incorporate the feedback of the actual tax lot owners, so that they have a
Absolutely.
good knowledge of, helping the process along as well and feeling informed
Right,
as well as
right. They're really major stakeholders.
they are major stakeholders.
Yep.
So
We want them to be champions of the project.
just like to reiterate that.
Thank you.
I
Appreciate it.
want to piggyback what you're saying there. We've always had all these public meetings and everything like that, and trying to keep public funds. I think we should just have a meeting with property. I think they need to understand property owners get behind it. It'll be a lot easier. So
Yeah, their questions are much more specific and, yeah, I mean, their set of questions are different than the average resident who just wants to know, like, what's this gonna look like? Absolutely. Thank you. And when, if we move forward and hiring a consultant, I think the first piece is a kickoff meeting, both with the agency board and then with this group, and specifically with this group to be talking about what public engagement looks like. And I would agree that specific meetings for specific groups, I think about business owners being a specific group, property owners being a specific group. I really appreciate that.
You mentioned the school district isn't affected by the tax.
Financially, right?
Financially, is that legislatively or is that because they're not within the geographical area?
No, that's through the ORS.
They're funded based off student numbers, not profit.
That's right. Yeah.
You know, something for all of these projects, not just this new West Side project, is there a way for us to extrapolate a mailing to the property owners within our region? I know we've always tried to reach out to like within the Heights, you know, and we would go out and flyers out, talk to the individuals that are operating businesses out of specific properties, but they might not be the property owners. Is there, do you have that? I mean, whenever there's a building going on near me, I feel like,
Yes. Yeah.
do we extrapolate a mailing list for all the properties within the Heights district, for example?
I would think, now I'm talking out of turn, speculation, but I would think we'd be able to get that from the assessor's office. So for this, within the city, I was thinking, gosh, we can probably get that from, you know, all of our water accounts, but the water account might be the tenant rather than the actual property owner. As well as we're looking at some areas that are currently outside the district, so they might not be on that, but the assessor's office should be able to provide that information. I believe the assessor is also one of the groups that has to be consulted in the feasibility and the TIF plan process. So, because, you know, we're going to increase their workload as well.
Thank you.
Great.
I think this is I think urban renewal is a great funding mechanism for us to better. And it doesn't have to all be business. There's ways that we can implement urban renewal funds. Again, it's not taxing people extra. It's
Right.
just allocating specific tax amounts to improve a specific district. I think it's a good thing.
Excellent.
I don't want you to think that I came across like earlier when I said I've never partaken in residential development with urban renewal. I think if we're allowed to use to create a district, and there's an opportunity for us to better that area. It's good.
Excellent. Well, and I think Hood River's had real success with urban renewal, but I also want to caution folks that this urban renewal district probably looks different. Like, we're not looking to recreate another waterfront district with, you know, really high-end, expensive light industrial. This will be its own, you know, working organically, that has a healthy mix of housing and some businesses and amenities. We really want to keep Hood River, you know, as Hood River. So
You had talked a little bit, about the parks. Is there some idea that there might be some further future development or evolution of our park system?
Yeah, so you might be aware that the Parks District, I think, early this winter, so like I'm thinking January, everything is like, was it before I got here or right after I got here? So probably November, December, January, the Parks District was interested in reforming, so they would need to dissolve and reform at a higher rate than what they currently are. And to do that, to rebuild the pool, and then also to have a higher permanent tax rate for all of the things that we asked them to do. My understanding is, and you probably all know better than I do, the Parks District really was created to run the pool, right? They started as an aquatics district, and then they took on parks, they took on trails, they've taken on other amenities. They've really grown much higher than their tax rate can really support. I think they heard some concerns about the way they had structured that taxing mechanism. Mostly they had put the bond for the building and the ongoing operating levy together into one piece. And I think they heard some objection from the county. So they have dropped that. However, they have been convening the port, the city, the school district, and themselves and the county to have some conversations about what restructuring might look like. So the Parks District could look really different in a couple of years. Anything they decide they're going to need to take to voters, right? If they choose to redistrict or if they do a bond separately for the pool, but they are definitely having those conversations right now. So, and they are aware that, or at least their staff are aware that we're having these conversations. I anticipate that any new parks that were brought in the West Side would be Park District parks. They wouldn't be city parks. But we need to know that even if the SDCs are there for them to buy the land, or for us to buy the land for them, that they're going to be able to operate them. So they're a really critical partner in this project. Definitely hear from Hood River residents that they would like to have more parks and especially more trails. So we'll see where that goes. Have you seen the multi-jurisdictional park plan? I'm happy to send out a link to that if you haven't seen that, or I've got paper copies in my office if you want. For sure. In fact, I think I'll just send a, if it's okay with you, I'll send a link to the three plans that I mentioned, the TSP, because I know, you have way too much free time, right? You want to read the TSP and the multi-jurisdictional plan, parks plan, and then the affordable housing strategy, because those are three really critical documents we're leaning on. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So I kind of jumped out of order a little bit earlier with, but now it's items from members. So is there?
Questions answered.
Welcome to the advisory. If there are, Jen, our next meeting, third Thursday in October, is that scheduled?
Yeah, and Chair, if I could just give you a preview of what I think the next couple meetings look like for you. I think in October, like I said, Dustin and I assume the consultant will be there to share potential scope of work for the Heights. Then in November, I anticipate reviewing the ports study, the study that they commissioned about the future of waterfront. And by then I hope to have an update for you about waterfront as well, or not waterfront, sorry, west side.
And at our next October meeting, we'll talk about the November, December meetings. I think in the past, we've changed the dates.
Oh, good to know. That makes sense.
Close to Christmas. So if there's important things that we discuss at the October meeting, we may change the dates of November and December. If there's nothing else, motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
All right, all in favor?